After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Of our Christmas series that is entitled Come to Worship. All right, so I'm so glad that you were here. Thank you for coming to worship this morning. Welcome to the church at Lake Forest. If I didn't get to introduce myself earlier, my name is Chris Sykes. I get to be one of the pastors here. And if you're one of our guests, welcome. I also forgot to welcome you. I've forgotten a lot of things this morning. All right, that just happens sometimes, you know, when your mind's I guess I wasn't ready. I'm ready to preach, but I don't think I was ready for the announcements. Listen, if you're one of our guests, we're so glad that you were here. We just want to welcome you. What we would love for you to do is in the seat pocket in front of you, there's a card that says, no perfect people allowed. We'd love for you just to, jot your name and maybe your phone number or your email address on there. And just let us know that you were here on your way out the door. Stop by the cafe, drop that off at the cafe, and we'd love to give you a gift to say thank you for coming. We're so glad that you were here. Thank you for being a part of our worship this morning. Thank you for watching online if you're watching online. And we love Christmas, right? I've said it before that there's two things that Jesus did that nobody else can do that draws a crowd. He was born of a virgin and he rose from the dead, right? And so there's two holidays that I think every church ought to just really blow out and invite everybody that they possibly can, and that's Christmas and Easter, right? We typically have a little bit bigger crowd on Easter than we do at Christmas, but Christmas is still, it's huge. Christmas Eve, that's one of those nights we're not used to coming together on a Tuesday night, right? I mean, that's not something that we always do as a church, but even though it may be not our normal routine, part of what we're saying is, listen, we're Christ followers. We're a church family that loves each other and we love Jesus. And so we're going to step out of our normal routine. We're going to invite our friends to maybe step out of their normal routine and just pause and celebrate the reason for the season. Celebrate the fact that Jesus was born and he was born to die. That's really what Christmas Eve is all about. And so what we're doing is we're taking a look, kind of a different look at the Christmas story this year. And it comes from Matthew 2:2 is where the title of our series comes from, Come to Worship. And what I want to do this morning is actually read Matthew 2:1 and 2, because we're going to talk about the wise men this morning. We're going to talk about the wise men. But what we're doing is each week we're focusing on a mode of worship, of something that we can do, an outward sign of what's going on the inside. So last week we talked about raised hands, and what we said was, listen, when we raise our hands to worship God, it's a picture on the outside of what's really going on the inside, in our hearts, that we want what's in our hearts to come out through our hands. And no, you don't have to raise your hand on every song and every word or whatever, but when we are in the presence of God, when people historically, biblically, have been in the presence of God, have felt the grace and mercy of God on their lives, one of the ways that they responded in worship was to raise their hands. When they were mourning, they raised their hands and prayed that God would come help them. When they were in trouble, they raised their hands and worshiped God in spite of being in trouble and asked that God would come help them. When they were at the top of the world, right, when amazing things were going on in their lives, they raised their hands. We raise our hands to worship God. So let's look at Matthew 2:1 and 2, and then we're going to kind of continue our talk about worship this morning. So verse 1 says this: Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. Everybody say King Herod. King Herod. King Herod was not a good king. He was not someone who really worshiped God. He may have faked it occasionally, but his heart was definitely not after God's heart. He was an evil king of the Jews. So it was during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking. Now, when they showed up asking their question, they went to the palace, right? They went to where the king lived because they're looking for a king to be born. Verse 2, it says, this is the question they asked, where is the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him. That phrase, come to worship, is where we get the title of our series for this Christmas. These wise men, they've traveled a great distance. They've seen this star, right? They've seen the star rising in the east. They come to Jerusalem. They come to King Herod, and they ask, where is the newborn king? And as I told you last week, they'd probably studied for days, for weeks, for months. They've been studying the stars. They've been studying ancient scriptures. They know that this is somehow a fulfillment of prophecy, and they've shown up and they're asking, where is he? And so it's not going to be on the screen, but what happens next in verse 3 and the next couple of verses is that Herod freaks out because he doesn't know that this is about to happen. He gets concerned, like he invites his advisors, his spiritual advisors, his truth sayers, all that stuff. He brings them all around. He's like, has anybody ever heard of what they're talking about? Who is this newborn king of the Jews? I thought I was the king of the Jews. And he's afraid that he's going to be overthrown. And part of the Christmas story, which we really won't get into this Christmas, but you need to know, is that eventually this evil King Herod called for the murder, the death of thousands of little baby boys, 2 years old and younger, after the fact, when the wise men didn't come back to him, and he wanted to make sure that this king, that this quote-unquote newborn king of the Jews was completely destroyed. So he wanted to wipe him out. He was not a good king. Now, what he said to the wise men was, tell me where he is so I can come worship him too, right? When you find him, come back and tell me, and I'm going to come worship him too. What he really wanted to do was just wipe him out. So then in verse 9, skip forward a few verses, Matthew 2:9, it says this, after this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was, right? So here they are. They've been traveling for a long time. Based on the nations that existed then and what we know about where they came from, the direction that they came from, most believe that these wise men, however many of them there were, that they came from Persia, right? That they, like modern day Iran is where they came from. And they had probably traveled around 900 miles to get to where they are. Now, I just want you to stop and think for a second. Today, 900 miles is not a short trip. It is not a short trip. Now, we can make it in a day in a car, but listen, in 900 miles, you can drive from here north across the border into Canada. In 900 miles, you can go kind of southwest from here and drive across the border into Mexico. In about 900 miles, you can kind of go southeast, and you can go another place that, quite frankly, you still need a valid ID and a passport to kind of fit in and get across the border there. It's called West Palm Beach, Florida. All right? And trust me, I lived there not in West Palm Beach, but close to there, very close to there in Coral Springs, Florida for a while. It's like a whole nother country when you, we're southern, but trust me, there's no rednecks that live in South Florida, all right? There's a few, right? There's a very few. But it's a different place. But it's 900 miles away, right? 900 miles. We lived just about 1,000 miles from here. And when we would travel that 1,000 miles back and forth from Coral Springs to Hernando and Olive Branch to visit family, I mean, it would take us, depending on whether our kids were healthy or, when we left and how much they slept and how tired I was and how many times we stopped, somewhere between driving fast, because I'm going to drive fast on that long of a trip, right? And basically from here to the red light, I'll probably drive fast too. But, it would take us somewhere. I think the fastest that we made it was probably around 13 hours. And the longest that it took us was, I think it was like 17 or 17 and a half hours because we had a sick kid who threw up like every hour, It was horrible. But it takes a day. It takes a day to drive 900 miles. That is a long, and it is a grueling, if you try to do it all in one day, that is a grueling trip. These guys were on donkeys, on camels. They were probably traveling with lots of people who were like an entourage kind of going with them. They had to cook their own food. They had to beware of robbers and vandals and take care of the animals that they brought with them to eat along the way, whatever. It took them, this was not a short trip. I just want you to understand that. This was not a short trip for them. It's about, just so that you know, 900 miles is about 2 times the width of Europe, like as in the continent, okay? It's a long trip, and these guys made it. In verse 9, they made it to Bethlehem. And then in verse 10, I want you to see what happens. In verse 10, after this long, grueling trip, it says, when they saw the star, they got there. They saw that the star had stopped over where the baby was. When they saw the star, they were what? Y'all read it. They were filled with joy. It wasn't, woo, thank God we finally got here. Oh, my Lord, my feet are killing me. I thought we were never going to make it. No, they were filled with joy. Why were they filled with joy? Because for generations, people had been writing about and talking about, and there had been rumors, there had been these prophecies, not just in the Bible, but outside of the Bible. There had been these prophecies that the one was coming, that there was going to be this Messiah, that there was going to be someone who was going to change the world. And I don't know what it was that these guys read, what they studied. We don't know exactly what it was that they saw in the sky, what kind of star it was. Was it miraculous? Was it something natural? Who cares? When they showed up, they were filled with joy. And the joy that's going on here, like that the Greek word it's actually like 4 words. And even when you read it in the English, it's kind of hard to translate. And listen, I'm not a Greek expert at all. I just try to read the definitions. But apparently it's a difficult word to even translate into English. And when you read it in different translations of the Bible, like this one says filled with joy. I think the NIV says they're overjoyed. I think it's the King James Version says, and this is probably the closest, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. In the Greek, this word, this phrase, filled with joy, basically means this is a compounding joy. That it's joy on top of joy on top of joy. It kind of means this. I'm happy to be happy because I'm happy that I'm happy because I'm happy. Right? I'm joyful to be joyful because I'm joyful so that I'm joyful. Right? Like that's really kind of what that phrase means. These guys were filled, they were overwhelmed, they were overjoyed because they had finally arrived, but it wasn't about their arrival, it was about his arrival. Whoever he was, they were about to meet him, and he was here, and it brought them great joy. They were overjoyed. That's one of the problems with Christianity today, is that so many of us are underjoyed. We are not filled with joy. Often we are devoid of joy. How is it that we can walk in the back door, we can walk in the side door, we can come in here week after week after week, not all of us, but many of us, with a sourpuss on, all right, with a frown on our face. I got to go to church again, right? We come in here and we're supposed to be filled with joy and worship God, but we're negative Nancys and negative Neds, and the world doesn't know us by what we're for, they know us by what we're against. How dare the church act like that? How dare we as individuals? Now listen, I'm not saying that you have to be happy, happy, happy all the time. It's not what I mean. The Bible says, mourn with those who mourn, weep with those who weep, but rejoice with those who are rejoicing. The problem is that many times we just carry this negativity with us all the time, and we're underjoyed. Listen, Jesus set foot on this earth to love us and to save us. And for that one reason only, we should be overjoyed. These guys hadn't even met him yet. They traveled 900 miles, not like 9 miles, and you pass like 4 restaurants, you stop and get your sausage biscuit at the gas station and get a rain because you stayed up too late the night before, or your coffee or whatever, and you roll in here and you're, oh gosh, got to sing this morning, whatever, right? Like, they were full of joy. Thank you. My wife is laughing. I love when I make my wife laugh on the front row. Listen, if you're filled with joy, okay, if you're filled with joy, tell your face. Let your face know, or as Dolly Parton says in one of our favorite movies, Still Magnolias, smile. It improves your face value. Right? I mean, like, that's what we should be doing as Christians. The world should know that Christmas is about Christ because we're smiling, we're happy, we're not standing in line. Listen, I was at Target last night. There were 1 million people at Target last night. There were 2 express lines open and 1 regular line. And what line was everybody in? The regular line, because we're all buying lots. We're buying more than 10 presents for our kids. I've got 4 kids. That's like 2.5 presents. I've got like stocking stuffers to buy and presents for grandparents. And yes, I'm in that line. And I have to admit, I was not filled with joy. I was not filled with joy. I was mumbling under my breath, but I said, listen, I'm not standing here. I'm getting that express. Like 30 people went past me in the express line. It finally was nobody. And so I just got in the express line, and she rang me. She didn't say anything about it. And when she started, I think there was this moment where it just sort of clicked. I went from, right? She said something like, hello, did y'all find everything you were looking for? Merry Christmas, whatever. And she started, I think when that first item went across the scanner and she didn't say you got to go get in the other line, I suddenly got joyful. Right, in my circumstance, I'm like, Merry Christmas, yes, we found everything we want. Let me help you. I want to make your job easier, right? I suddenly found joy because of the circumstances. Listen, Jesus Christ should bring us joy, not just the circumstances, all right? We should not be underjoyed Christians. Now listen, this is the introduction to the message, all right? We haven't even gotten to it yet. Matthew 2:11 goes on to say this, they entered the house and saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down, and what did they do? They worshiped him. They bowed down and they worshiped him. Now listen, they've traveled 900 miles to see whoever this is that they've come to see, this newborn king of the Jews. They bowed down and they worshiped him. And then what does it say that they did to worship him? I want you to understand this. This is the context of the verse. They bow down to worship him, and to worship this newborn king of the Jews, it says, then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The way that they worshiped Jesus was with gifts, was with their treasure. They gave him gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They bowed, they worshiped, and they gave him gifts. Now listen, it's been debated for centuries, and I'm not gonna, this isn't part of the message, but people have often wondered, do these gifts, do they symbolize something? Commonly, most people would say that the gold that they gave kind of symbolized Jesus' kingship, that he's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, that a fitting gift for a king would be gold. And so maybe that represented his kingship. Maybe the frankincense, which was an incense, right? It was the kind of incense that they would burn in the temple, in lots of temples to worship gods, but burn in the temple to worship our God. And so maybe the frankincense sort of represented Jesus' priestly role, because he was and is the great high priest who stands before God for us, talking to God, pleading our case, offering himself as a sacrifice for us. He is the great high priest. And then the myrrh. Myrrh was this kind of a perfume. And what they would use myrrh for often was embalming, because it smelled so good. They wanted to cover the stench of the decaying body. And so maybe the myrrh represented the fact that Jesus, this newborn king of the Jews, was actually born to die, that was his purpose. That's just a side note. I really don't know what they represent, but maybe that was it. But when they showed up, what I want you to notice, because we're talking about worship these 4 weeks. Last week we talked about raised hands. Next week we're going to talk about pouring out our hearts. For Christmas Eve, we're going to talk about bowing our knees and bending our knees to God. But this week, it's about giving him gifts. It's about giving gifts. Every time we give gifts to God, it is an act of worship. Every time we give gifts to God, it is an act of worship. Now, I already know what some of you are thinking. Oh, snap, I came on the giving message weekend. I've never been to this church before, and they're about to ask me for money. I brought my friend, and the last time I brought my friend, he talked about giving, and that was like 6 months ago, and now he's talking about giving again, and my friend's never going to come back. Listen, we got boxes on the wall. We don't pass plates. What I want to tell you, if you're new here, we don't expect you to give a thing. Yes, we give. Our church gives. We take up tithes and offerings. Mine's automated. If you want to go to our website, you can give that way. You can do it from your bank the way that I do it. I just say you should automate holy habits. And yes, I'm going to unapologetically talk about giving this morning. But it's not about getting something from you. And quite frankly, when God says to give, it's not about God getting something from you. It's about us giving something to God. It's about us following in obedience and worshiping God. Remember last week, I defined worship this way according to Romans 12:1 and 2, that worship is living a lifestyle of obedience to God. That yes, worship is singing, it's raising hands, it's bowing our knees. Worship is playing instruments for those who can play. But worship in general is living a lifestyle of obedience to God. Not because we have to, not because of some duty, but because we want to. because of the grace and the mercy and the love that he's poured out on us. And one of the ways that we see scripturally that we worship God, that we obey him out of love and we worship him is by giving, is by being generous. And so this morning we're going to talk a little bit about giving. Now listen, it's okay to feel that way. Like if you're freaked out and scared to death, I hope that you'll come back to church next week. But it's okay, right? We're all at different places on the journey, right? Like I said a few minutes ago, we are a church where no perfect people are allowed. You can be a part of this church, quite frankly, and never give. And we'll never ask you individually, so why haven't you given yet? That's not going to happen. You can be a part of this church. You can belong to this church and not believe everything that we believe. Now, we're going to preach the truth. We're going to give you a safe place where you can ask questions and where you can grow. And my heart for you is that as you learn to worship and to love God more and more, that you will learn to give. Why should it be this way? Why should it be this way? Why should we give? All right, so I'm going to give you the 1 point of my 1 point message. I asked my wife on the way to church this morning. I said, I got a 1 point message. How long do you think it's going to take me to preach it? She said, about 2 hours. She's probably right because we're just through the introduction, all right? 1 point. This is the 1 point. I want you to get it. Why should we give? Because of this truth. Love gives. Love gives. If you're taking notes, write it down. This is it. Love gives. Now, I've got some verses that we're going to read in a minute, but before I even get to Scripture, I just want you to understand, ordinary, everyday people understand the idea that love gives. That before you walked in here this morning, you got this concept. This is not something new. Christmas, you're going to buy Christmas presents for your friends, for your family, for your kids. Some of you grandparents, my parents in particular, probably my in-laws, are going to spoil their grandkids. They're going to buy them way too much and spend way too much money on them. They're going to sugar them up. They're going to give them cookies for breakfast and stuff like that. Why do they do it? Because they hate us and they love they love our kids. All right? They give all those gifts not because they hate us, but because they love their grandkids. Literally had this conversation yesterday, and this is true almost every single year. So Stephanie and I, we kind of have this. It's sort of an unwritten rule, because rules don't really apply to me. It's this unwritten rule that we don't really spend much on each other at Christmas, right? It's not that we don't buy each other any gifts. I can't say it's a no gift rule, but it's a loose, we're going to spend it all on the kids, and we got 4 kids, and we got 4 nieces and nephews, and parents and all of that, and we want to bless and love on everybody else. We're not going to spend a lot of money on each other. Until Christmas morning shows up and Stephanie opens whatever gift that I have bought for her that I've spent way too, an obscenely amount of money on probably. There's going to be 1 or 2 things. And listen, obscene to me is a few $100s. Obscene to you might be several $1,000s. I don't know. Everybody's got a different definition for obscene. It doesn't matter. But when you're not supposed to spend much and you spend about 10 times as much as you probably ought to spend, why do you do that? I'm like, baby, just shut up and take it. It's a gift. It's because I love you, right? I'm in charge. Take it, love it, because I love you. I'm in charge. I do. I'm really not in charge. I wish I was. But I do it because love gives. I buy for my kids because love gives. Listen, you all know a guy like this. You all know a guy like this. Maybe some of you guys, maybe some of you girls, but maybe some of you guys were like this. Valentine's, as you were dating somebody, Valentine's rolls around, and on February the 12th, you suddenly break up. And then around February 15th, it's amazing. It's a miracle. You make up again, right? Christmas rolls around December 22nd, there's this knockdown, drag out kind of a fight, whatever. Maybe it's just a text message today, I'm sorry, baby, I just need some space, whatever, around December 22nd. And then you get the text or you get the phone call or you get he just drives up to pick you up for New Year's Eve because you're going to spend New Year's Eve together, right? Why? Because they're cheapskates. And it's not love, right? Now, some of you, I'm going to let you off the hook. If you were that guy or that girl who broke up on the 14th and got, or on the 12th and got back together on the 15th, or broke up on the 22nd and got back together on the 29th or the 30th or whatever, or before their birthday or whatever it was, listen, I'm going to let you off the hook because it wasn't love. You didn't marry them anyway. I hope they didn't marry you, all right? But now it's love, right? On February 12th, you don't say, babe, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to divorce you for 3 days, right? You might not get them a gift. Probably should. But we do it because love gives. Love gives. Love gives. I can remember one time we were throwing a birthday party. It was supposed to be, I've told this story before, my kids, like all my kids even talk about this because they're all jealous of the one child of Campbell, all right? Campbell got this one year. We were going to have this little birthday party when we lived in South Florida. We had a great little house we looked for forever. It had a pool in the backyard. We loved living in South Florida. It was an amazing time. I never want to disparage South Florida. It's a great place to live. It is a true melting pot. It's just awesome. Great church, great friends. I had a pretty good sized staff that worked for me. But we decided that we were going to throw this little party. I don't remember what birthday it was, like fourth or fifth birthday. It was the year that Frozen came out, or like the year after Frozen came out. So Frozen, was still pretty popular, especially amongst little girls. And so we're going to do this little get together, right? A little cookout in the backyard, do a little Frozen birthday cake, and so we'll, if we're doing this Frozen cake, we need to have like Frozen themed treats, right? Because it can't just be about the cake. We need to like dip cookies in white chocolate and sprinkle little stuff on them and pretzel rods, and so that cake turned into like a table spread covered in desserts, right? Everybody enjoys that. And then, we do the guest list and we're like, well, so, baby, who do you want to invite? Campbell's like Miss Popularity. She's never met a stranger. She loves everybody. So, of course, she wants to invite everybody, right? And we really wanted to limit her, but, she invited a few of her friends, but she, and we agreed, like, well, maybe we should invite my staff because they're pretty young. And then we've got this great small group that we're a part of, and they've got young kids too, and maybe we ought to invite this kind of that. And like the 4, 5, 6 people that were going to be at our house turned into like 30-something people. This little cookout had a bounce house, had snow cones, had dessert, like a buffet of desserts, and of course, all the food to cook out. And I didn't do it because I hate my daughter, right? I didn't invite all of those people because I just can't stand to be around them. Love gives, period. We know that it's true. We know that love gives. You can see it in the lives of ordinary, everyday people. You'll see it at Christmas, ordinary, everyday times. But we also see it in Scripture, and we see it from God, that God gives because He loves us. Listen, what does John 3:16 say? For God so what? So loved. Put it up on the screen. This is a verse that like probably everybody knows, but for God so loved the world that He did what? He gave. He loved, so He gave. He gave His one and only Son so that whoever believes in Him will not perish but will have eternal life. Listen, if you want to know how to share the gospel, you can do it with this one verse. God loved, so God gave. And if we believe, we receive. That is the gospel. God loves, so God gave His one and only Son. And if we believe in Him, if we place our faith and trust in the fact that Jesus died for our sins, if we believe, then we receive His salvation, His forgiveness, His eternal life. Love gives. God loved us. As a matter of fact, Romans 5:8 says, but God demonstrates His own love for us in this. While we were sinners, He didn't wait till we were perfect. If I waited till my kids were perfect to buy them, listen, I love Santa and the naughty and nice list. That's awesome, Did you make the naughty list? He's making a list, checking it twice, going to find out who's naughty and nice, right? We all know the song. It's awesome. If we had to be perfect to get on the nice list, none of us would be getting any Christmas presents this year, right? Thank God that we don't have to be perfect to receive His love and receive His gift. While we were still sinners, what did Christ do? He died for us. God demonstrates His own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. God loved, so God gave. Here's what I want you to understand. God, the Father, didn't just shout His love from heaven. He didn't just stand up and say, I love you people down there. No, He showed His love on earth. He didn't just shout His love from heaven. He showed His love on earth. God in the flesh, Emmanuel, God among us, set foot on this earth in the form of Jesus, in the form of a baby, born to die for us, to set us free from our sin. Love gives. Love gives. And we give to God. I want you to understand, this is a worshipful response. We give to God because he gave to us first. We love God because he loved us first. And some of you might be thinking this. You might be thinking, well, listen, Pastor, I love God, but you don't understand. It's really hard for me to give. And you may have a variety of reasons for that. There may be some very real financial struggles. You may have really made some poor choices, or maybe you've been fired, you've been laid off, or whatever's going on. And listen, if you're not making any income, you don't give, right? I mean, if you're not making anything, you don't have anything to give. But if you're making something and something's going on, like giving is a response in worship. You may be afraid. You may be afraid about just letting go, not having control over how am I going to trust that church? What is it that they're going to do with my money, right? That may be a real fear for you. Maybe we need to sit down and we can talk about that. I can tell you and show you what we do. I don't have time this morning to go into all that, but one-on-one, if that's like a real fear for you, maybe I can help you get over that fear, the way that we handle our money. And it's not just me writing checks to myself and I don't even touch the money, right? I don't, literally, not on the bank account, don't do anything with it. We got elders and other people who do that, but it's not me. You may be afraid, and it's okay. You may be in financial stress. You may be, listen, I was born into a house and went to church. I was raised to believe what I believe from a very young age, and I was taught to give. It was modeled for me, so it's been easy for me to give for most of my life. I was taught what the tithe was, what offerings were at a very young age, and the first time that I got an allowance and gifts and whatever, I had the little piggy banks with the little jars, and I put my money in it, and I knew what 10% was, and I learned how to give at a very young age. But for me, there was a time, and I've shared this with you before, so some of you have already heard this story, but when Stephanie and I first got married, we lived here. I was actually the kids pastor here for about 5.5 years. And we still lived in the area, but we went to another church, went into ministry full-time at another church in Memphis, and we were there for a little while. And it was not a healthy time. It was not for that church. It was a massive church. It was a horrible experience for us. The church split. We decided to leave the church. It was a mega church that went from literally 7,000 one week to 2,400 the next week, and then dropped down below 1,000 in the weeks after that, and has since still not gone anywhere near back up to the 7,000 mark. But it was a rough year. It was a rough year in ministry, and I was so disheartened. I didn't know if I even wanted to stay in ministry. I mean, I thought I did, and we started looking for churches, and we weren't sure where we wanted to go and what we wanted to be a part of. And finally, we found this church, or this church found us, in Decatur, Alabama. And so we packed up and we moved. And for my wife and I, we'd gone to college and whatever, and I'd lived in an apartment with friends in college, and we were on our own, paying our own bills. But we had, Grayson was about a year old, and Stephanie was pregnant with Caitlin. So we had one and one on the way, and this was the first time that we were moving away from family. Stephanie had never lived away from her mom and dad before. I had never, other than college, and I came home so they could do my laundry and feed me, right? It's not really living away when you get to come home and get your laundry done and get fed great meals on the weekend. So we'd never really lived away. The other thing that I had never done is I had never had a credit card. I'd always I had a debit card, and I used that, but I'd never had a credit card. And so I decided it's going to be a hard move. I don't know what's going to happen with this church, right? And God, I trust you, but that's what we like to do. God, I trust you, but something may happen. So I'm going to get a credit card just in case. I want you to understand, I got the credit card just in case. Got a credit card. Moved to Decatur, Alabama. That emergency just in case card started paying for stuff. And on the front end, it was I swipe the card, put the groceries on it, put whatever on it. I'm going to pay it off at the end of the month. I did that for a while. But it wasn't long before that became just kind of the habit. And I started because I loved my family. I wanted to take care of my wife, take care of my kids, give them everything that they wanted more than just what they needed. I started charging up that credit card, and I got us into debt. I was handling the finances completely at that time, and I got us into debt, into several $1,000s of credit card debt. And for my entire life, I'd always tithed. I'd always given 10% of my income to the church. And when you're looking at that credit card bill and all of a sudden you get to like a couple of months go by where you can't pay off that balance and that interest starts accruing, and then you find yourself several $1,000s in debt, and like the minimum payments are starting to even get hard to make, and you really don't want that interest to grow. What do? You look at your budget and you try to see where you can cut, right? I'm gonna tighten up a little bit here so I can pay a little bit more there. I'm gonna tighten up a little bit here so I can pay a little bit more to the card. And then you look at this category that's 10% of your income, and I don't care how much you make, 10% is a lot. And what I did was think, okay, if I just take that 10%, I can use it to pay off the credit card faster, and then I'll go back to giving once I get the card paid off. And so I did. I stopped tithing. I stopped giving to pay off that credit card. And you know what happened? It was so amazing. In just a few short months, I got us into even more debt. That 10% did not help at all. What I was saying to God was, God, I trust you, except for, God, I trust you, but, and so God, I trust you, but I'm not gonna, it's not good right now, God. Right now is not a good time. I got to take care of this credit card debt. And it kept growing until finally somebody called me on it. I admitted I was hiding it from her. She didn't know. She thought we were still giving. She thought we were still tithing because that's who I am. I came clean to her. She helped me. I just gave her all the finances. But we immediately started giving. In just a few short months, she had those bills paid off. We had a credit card. We had no debt. We were back to where we needed to be. And giving like we should always give. It's very easy to be afraid. It's very easy to have something going on in our hearts, something going on in our heads that may keep us from giving. But listen, what I want you to understand is when you're not giving, you're not worshiping. There's a barrier between you and God, and you may be singing and worshiping God in one way, but there is a very real area of your life that you have blocked off from God that you said, God, I'm going to worship you this way, but I just don't have time. I don't have the finances. I don't have the resources. I'm afraid. Whatever the reason is, I'm not going to worship you this way. And so we block that worship to God. And there's this, I love Proverbs. There's this very famous proverb that many of you have probably heard. It's Proverbs chapter 3, 5, and 6. As a matter of fact, it would just be awesome, like Jessica Five Ash, if you just started singing this song with me, because I'm not going to make you sing it, but we even sang songs, like she was one of my kids when we were here, and we sang this song. Stephanie sang it with me, about trust in the Lord with all your heart. I'm not going to sing it. I'm not that great of a singer. But you've probably heard this verse before. Listen, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says this: trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. And we've heard that verse a million times, like just trust God, and he's going to show you which direction you should go. And we go, all right, I'm going to trust God in everything. But then we don't read the rest of the verses. And I want you to see these verses in context. It's talking about trusting God and God showing you the way to go, and he's even going to make the path straight. Like he's going to make it easier for you to follow him if you'll just trust him. All right, that's Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Verse 7 says, do not be wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord and shun evil. In other words, you're dumb and God's not. He's got way more wisdom than you do, so don't be wise in your own. Like, listen, if you try to do it on your own, you're going to mess it up. I can prove it. How's it been going for you if you've been trying to do it on your own? I mean, really. Your marriage, your finances, and listen, some people may be ridiculously financially, like just they're gifted with money and they don't need God to show them how to manage their money. They're millionaires, right? But then other areas of their life are completely falling apart because they're trusting themselves in one area and they're probably trusting themselves in every other area, and they're not trusting in God. And what God says is, don't be wise in your own eyes. I don't care if you're rich or you're poor. If you do it with me, it's going to be better. Either way, whether you're rich or you're poor, don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord, shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. If you just trust me and do what I'm trying to teach you to do, you're going to be healthier. Your bones are going to be stronger. Like you're going to be able to stand. When the world wants to knock you down, you get to knock back because you're doing what I've called you to do. So here's the context. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Follow God. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Shun evil. Fear the Lord. Trust me. Follow me. I'm going to make you healthier and stronger. Verse 9. Honor the Lord with your wealth Verse 9, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. God says, listen, trust me. Don't follow your own wisdom, because my ways are higher than your ways. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts. When your thoughts are, I can't do it. I don't know what to do. I can't get, like, I'm looking at my finances. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know how to do this. God, I mean, even if you're a Christian, you're like, I know I should do this, but I don't know how I'm going to do this. God says, listen, my ways are higher than your ways. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts. Trust me. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Follow me. Honor the Lord with your wealth. Worship me with gifts. Manage your money my way, and your money's going to go farther. Honor me with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops, then your barns will be filled to overflowing. Listen, your barn may be big, your barn may be small, but what God is saying is, I don't care what size the barn, I'm going to help you fill it to overflowing, right? First fruits. What are first fruits? Malachi, he defines first fruits. Jesus talks about it. We see it in Hebrews. What the first fruits was the tithe, right? In the Old Testament, it's the tithe. The tithe equals a tenth. The tithe equals a tenth. It is 10%. It is 10% of all that you have, but it's the first 10%. What God expected Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve back in the very beginning is the same thing that God expects today. He wants your first and your best. He doesn't want your sloppy seconds. And God is the only one deserving of your first and your best. Let's stop giving God the leftovers. So the first fruits is our first and our best in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. But in the Old Testament, it was the tithe. And I don't have time to go into this. You should have been here Wednesday night because I talked about it Wednesday night. But in the tithe in the Old Testament, we think of the tithe as the temple tithe. They were commanded to bring 10% of all that they had into the temple once a year. They gave 10% of everything that they'd made that year. They brought it in, and that's kind of what funded the church, right? And that's how we think of the tithe. But did you know that they had more than one tithe in the Old Testament? That the Israelites, you can go back and you can read it. Read in Leviticus, read 1 through 7. There's different festivals, and I'm trying to remember where all the tithes are. It's slipping me right now. But anyway, there was the temple tithe, which was 10%. Then there was what's called the festival tithe. Every year, they took 10% of all that they had, and they threw a party with it. Literally, like God said, listen, you're going to come, you're going to travel, you're going to worship me. If it's too hard for you to travel with 10% of your flocks and 10% of your crops, sell 10% of all that you've got, bring the money with you. When you get here to Jerusalem, when you get here to the temple, then you're going to buy all the food and everything that you need, all the wine that you can drink, all the food that you can eat, all the wine that you can drink, and with 10% of everything you've had, you're going to throw a huge party to worship me, to bless me. That was another part of the tithe. And then every 3 years, there was another 10% that was given for poor people every third year. That's 23% a year, 23 and a third percent a year on average. Some years it was 30%. Listen, we think 10% is huge, and 10% is the tithe. But if we were living like the Israelites lived in the Old Testament, it'd be 23 and a third percent every single year. Imagine your budget and what you make right now. And whatever you pay in taxes, just double that. And that's probably what, because you're probably paying 25 to 35% in taxes, right? Depending, and if you're a small business owner, you're probably paying more than that. Out of a duty, out of an obligation, God says, listen, you manage your money my way. I'm going to help you take this 90% or this 80% or this 77% and go a whole lot farther with it, because what you're doing is you're trusting me. You're trusting me. We asked the question Wednesday night, why do you think that they would only take up, this 10% poverty tithe every third year and not every year? Because in the good years, the nation of Israel trusted God, and there weren't that many poor people when they trusted God. Yeah, there were a few individuals who frankly didn't trust God, and so what the property owners did when they would harvest their crops, they would leave a little bit around the edge for the poor people to come and eat from. Because they loved God, and they knew that the landowners loved God. They knew that God was going to take care of them, and they would leave a little bit around the edge. That's the story of Boaz and Ruth. You go back and read that. She was poor because she had moved a long way, and she's, picking up the leftovers in the field so that she would have plenty to eat, and Boaz saw her and loved her, right? God wants us to trust him. He wants us to bring, whether it's 5%, 10%, 50%, he just wants us like the wise men to worship him with gifts. So here's what I want you to understand. I know the one point of the 1 point message is love gives. But in church, in Scripture, in the kingdom, in our relationship with God, here's what we do as a result of that. We bring our first and our best, and we trust God with the rest. That is what God asked Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel to do. That's what God's expecting us to do. Let's put that up on the screen, guys. We give our first and our best, and we trust God with the rest. We trust Him to bless the rest. Whether it's 90% or it's 80% or it's whatever it is, what I know is, and some of you are nodding your heads because you're givers, you're tithers. You know it's true. That I can go, that 90% with me and God can go a whole lot farther. Like 90% with God, because I've given 10% to God. 90% with God goes a whole lot farther than 100% without God. It just doesn't. I cannot explain it. All I can do is just trust God and do it, and that's what I've been doing. We bring our first and our best, and we trust God to bless the rest. You know who doesn't like a giving message? People who don't give. You know who loves a giving message? People who give because they've lived it. Man, they're like, yes, let me share some stories. Listen, pretty much all my life, except that one time I got us into debt, pretty bad with the credit card. For the rest of my life, I've had people who've asked me, how did you afford that? How can you do what you've done? Because I know what you make, and you don't make much. You're a teacher, you're a pastor, you're whatever, like over the years, regardless of the job that I've had. How do you pay for that? Because we're not the kind of church where I'm like going to lock the doors until everybody gives enough so that I can go buy whatever my new car is, right? I know, listen, I've got a new car and an old car. And you know what? I own the title to both. They're both paid for. We have a nice house, and yes, we have a nice mortgage, but I pay an extra $100 a month to try to pay that mortgage down. I've got 30% equity in my very nice house. My kids are homeschooled. My wife's a stay-at-home mom, and we decided this year that we wanted to tweak their education a little bit, but it was going to require us to spend more money on their homeschool education, that the curriculum, depending on the kid, was going to be somewhere between twice as much and 10 times as much as what we were paying before. And I had the money to pay for it. I just told Stephanie, we're going to figure it out. Well, I'll figure it out. I do work 2 jobs, and I don't do it because I hate my family. I do it because I love my family. And I tithe here, and I give above and beyond here. And there are things around this church that I've paid for, that other people have paid for, that people who love to give, they just love to give. They just love to give. You know, when the student ministry comes to me and says, hey, Pastor Chris, is there extra money in the budget for some stuff in our student ministry room now? We'd like to paint it, like we've got a plan. We'd like to paint this in, and we'd like to paint that in, and we want a couple of couches, and we want some lights, and can we get a new TV? And I'm thinking okay, so that's $1,000, and that's $1,000, and that's probably $500, and I'm looking at our church budget, and I'm thinking, yeah, what the heck? I love kids. I'll figure out how to pay for it. If the church can't afford it, I'll just swipe my card. Let's do it. Go do it. You love kids. I want to support it. I'm not the only one that does it. There are others in our church that do the same thing. Somebody will walk up to me and say, Pastor Chris, here's $100. You just know what it needs to go to. Or here's $100. Here's extra money for the laundry detergent. Here's extra money for the Halloween event. Here's whatever. Y'all give money, and Daryl McCool, you put it in a bucket out there, and how many, because I do not remember, how many pairs of socks and men have you fed this year out of the leftovers, basically? $800 worth. How many? Yeah. There you go. Listen, that's outside of our church budget. That's not like something that we give to as a church. That's something that some of you give to as a church. Just an extra $800. And I know 800 may not sound like a lot, but when you got nothing and there's $800, that's huge. That is huge. We have been a part of feeding thousands of people this year. We have been a part of providing housing for orphans and families. We've been able to be a part of that because we love people, we love God, and we give. Listen, just like we talked last week, what's happening with our hands is a picture of what's going on in our hearts. That when we worship God with raised hands, what's happening is what's in our hearts is coming out, and we just can't stop it. That's the way giving is. When we give, your level of giving is an indication of what's going on in your heart. Now, I'm not saying that you got a dead heart if you don't give. That's not what I mean. But what I'm saying is if you've got a heart for God, you love God's kingdom, you want to invest in the kingdom, you love children and youth, you love this church, you love some other charity that's sharing the gospel, that's spreading the gospel, because we give part of our church budget to other charities that's spreading the gospel, that's feeding people. That's part of the way that we give as a church. When you do those things, what you're doing is you're taking what's in your heart and it's coming out. The level of your giving is an indication of what's going on in your heart. And I don't mean like the dollar amount. I mean like the percentage. How much it is that you just love. Because when my kids want something and I can afford it, I spend it. I'll spend more on Christmas this year than I'll spend on them, the rest of the year. Now, I don't spend it on them the rest of the year, which is how I can spend it on them at Christmas time, right? But I'll spend money on it because I love them. We do that as a church. Love gives. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of your crops, and your barns will be filled to overflowing. I want to close this way. Listen, I don't sit around church. Like I don't come in. And be that, they don't even appreciate me. I mean, a group of ladies made a tree and some wreaths and some bows, gave it their time, and I bought some lights last year and some windows and that old Daryl, he's never said thank you. I don't do that. I'm not that negative Nancy and that negative Ned. The reason that I give, the reason that some of you give so much of your time, of your talent, of your tithe, is because you are overjoyed. You're overjoyed because Jesus is a part of our lives, that Jesus is a part of our existence. And because you're overjoyed and because you'll give your time and you'll give your tithe and you'll give your talents, you know what you'll do? You'll give the ultimate gift. And here is the ultimate gift. The ultimate gift is you. You are the ultimate gift. It's giving all of yourself to God because it all belongs to God anyway. He's the creator of the universe. He knit you in your mother's womb. You belong to Him. And when you trust Jesus as your Savior, He calls you His child, His son, His daughter. You're joint heirs with Christ. And because we're joint heirs with Christ, we want to give ourselves back to Him. Romans 12:1 says it this way. This is Paul. Listen, this is Paul who hated Christians. If you're here this morning, you're like, I don't know about this church thing. This whole giving thing is freaking me out. Can't believe he's talking about giving. Paul hated the church. His name was Saul before it was Paul. He persecuted. He put them in jail. He made sure that they died when they got there. But then Jesus called him, transformed him, changed him, and most of the New Testament was written by Paul. And what Paul, the hater of Christians, wrote, Romans 12:1 says, and so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies, give yourself, give all of yourself to God because of all that He has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind He will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship God. If you want to truly worship God, give Him all of you. Yes, it's about your treasure. Yes, when the wise men showed up, they opened their treasure chest and they blessed this family in a way. This family had to flee to Egypt. Joseph and Mary, they had to run for their lives. How are they going to finance that trip? With the miracle that showed up in front of them, with the treasure of the wise men. When you give of your gifts, there are things that we can finance that we can't finance any other way. There are people whose lives have been changed at this church because some of you have given. When we give, it changes the world around us. And what God is saying is, listen, I want all of you. I want you to give all of yourself to me. And when you give me yourself physically, this is your spiritual service of worship. Every breath that you have, the heartbeat of your heart should be about the kingdom. Listen, I've told you over and over again, you're kingdom bringers. Everywhere you go, you bring the kingdom with you. Everywhere you go, you bring the kingdom with you. And last week, I taught you something new. That we don't just worship God, that we are worshipers. You cheer at a ball game. You're a worshiper. When your little baby boy, little baby girl was born, you cheered. You posted it on Instagram and Facebook. Or maybe if your kid's a little bit older, you took an actual picture. Either way, you cheered, you celebrated. Maybe you popped some bubble, you smoked a cigar. I don't know what you did, but you worshiped. In that moment, you worshiped your wife. You worshiped the doctor. You praised them. You thanked the nurses. We are worshipers. God created us to worship him. And one of the ways that we worship is with our gifts.